Everybody, welcome. It's really exciting to be here at Discoverability, and it's wonderful that you're continuing to network so actively. You'll have lots of opportunity for that. So my name is Dr. Sarah Diamond, and I'm the hostess of this really fantastic panel. I'm going to introduce our three speakers or participants really in a moment, but I wanted to talk a little bit about why this discussion is so incredibly important. If we haven't figured that out already from this morning, it's very clear that there's tremendous disruption underway in all of our industries, and we're at a time where there is an opportunity for really different kinds of economic models. We need, of course, to look to Canada, we need to look at niche markets, and we need to look at international market share. So we really are, shifting from what has been a very subsidized economy in the Canadian context into one where that is, as I think we know, frankly, changing. And at the same time, we have a set of new tools that are very, very powerful tools that are from really big data. So the ability to really deeply understand product, how it moves, where it moves, and how audience receive that product, how they feel about it, and what their desires and interests are. So that's really a huge opportunity. At the same time, one can say that maybe as producers, and I hope there are some in the room, we don't want to completely leave algorithms to their own devices, so to speak. So, what kind of expertise do we need that can balance the really important role of editorial decision-making around content investment and production, and what the data tells us. So we have a really fantastic panel here who's going to help with that conversation. I'm going to introduce them very briefly, and then I'm going to ask them some questions. I should mention, I think the reason that I'm here is that I am the president of a university, but in my spare time, I run a visual analytics lab that works a lot with media outlets. And we really do a lot of work in trying to understand the kinds of data that we're discussing and how to make it meaningful for different kinds of expert users, frankly, as well as audiences. And so we develop analytics for parallel industries, in particular the news media and the financial service industry, using things like sentiment analysis, recommended and taste graphs, which relate demographics to media consumption and advertising. We're going to talk about some of those tools over the course of the panel. We're going to also not assume, and this is a reminder to the participants here, that everybody has a deep understanding of analytics and what we're talking about. So just like to do a bit of a survey of the audience, and then I will introduce my colleagues. So how many of you are producers? Okay, so we do have a group. How many of you are distributors, broadcasters? Okay, good.
How many are
Cable,
journalists?
Advertising industry. Okay, a few. So now we have a sense of who we're speaking to, and it's so helpful. So Neil McGinney is president and CEO of Numeris. He brings 25 years of media experience. Prior to his appointment, Neil was chief business officer of the CBC's English services. And prior to the CBC, Neil held various roles at Southern, now Postmedia. Neil has focused on strengthening Numeris' ability to provide evident broadcast measurement, consumer behavior data, and intelligence in a constantly changing environment. Mark Allen is the Senior Director of Research and Analysis at CBC Radio Canada. He leads audience survey and industry research. He has a passion for media technology and its impact for consumers and for the future of media measurement. Mark is also an active Numeris member, serving on multiple committees guiding television, radio, nonlinear, and cross-media measurement in Canada. And before CBC, he was a consultant for PwC's entertainment and media practice. He is also an academic and teaches at Carleton. Felix Cisneros is a New York-based media and technology operations executive who focuses on optimizing the digital supply chain for global media companies. Felix has worked with motion picture studios, television networks, and digital media companies to implement technology and workflow strategies across nearly every business segment. And most recently, he is VP Digital Supply Chain Operations for AMC Networks, which owns the cable brands AMC, IFC, Sundance TV, and WeTV. He oversees operations across the entire content lifecycle, from production to delivery and distribution to all platforms. What a team. So I'd like to start, Neil, with a question for you. Can you talk about the kind of data sources that you measure, and a little bit about their characteristics, and give us a sense of how the Canadian market is moving towards measurement capability?
Sure, happy to do that. So, just so everyone knows, Numeris is a leading audience measurement company in this country and a global leader. Just a little bit about ourselves, so that'll help frame the answer to the question. We're a non-profit with our members, owned by broadcasters, advertisers, and agencies. So we focus on measuring content in that particular ecosystem. On a daily basis, Numeris supplies data that supports over $3 billion in annual revenues, advertising revenues. So what do we measure? We measure audio and video, TV and radio. We have what we believe is a world-class measurement system, what we call portable people meters, called PPMs. And why that's world-class is because it's a passive medium that measures live, streamed live, on demand, playback, both currency and 7 to 28 days. We're also doing over the top recently on all devices, in and outside of the home. So when you're thinking about the video universe, if I can use that nomenclature, Numeris captures over 90% of total video consumed on a monthly basis, measured by hours. And on the audio spectrum as well, using PPM, as well as both the audio and the video, we're using diary methodology as well. So we capture a significant amount of audience data, a vast majority, and I'd say equivalent on a world scale.
So how does that intersect with advertising consumption by those audiences?
So Numeris measures the consumption of content, which then becomes the currency for purposes of determining advertising rates and revenue generation. Different than the States, we're measuring average minute audience versus in the States to doing commercial ratings. So there's a huge distinction. I think it's just to get it out there. The only similarity between Canada and the US in terms of audience measurement is the hardware. Everything else is different.
So I am going to jump to Felix on this, and Mark, I will come back to you shortly. But Felix, so you can give us that international perspective from the US. So what are you measuring, and what do you learn in terms of some of the relationship between content consumed and advertising, placement of dollars?
Sure. Most recent development has really been the Live plus 7 measurement, which has become kind of the new currency amongst the broadcasters, where you're measuring content that's consumed live plus the next 7 days, whether that's viewed on video on demand or via a consumer's DVR. And now, of course, we want to slice and dice that even more to be able to see, well, how much of that was consumed on the video on demand service versus a consumer's DVR. And we have recently telecast VOD, which is offered by Nielsen, which measures that. Post Live plus 7, we're now looking at things like cross-platform VOD, SVOD, on the OTT services, TV Everywhere, which is authenticated with your cable subscription. And so really trying to look at all of the various areas and all of the different windows that people watch in. And what we've seen with some of the most recent metrics is, depending on how people view that content within the first 7 days, for instance, a news series, which people don't know about yet, they haven't thought to DVR it. And so many of them, they'll hear about it, they'll hear the buzz from their friends via social media, and so you'll see a much higher uptick on VOD within the first 7 days versus a series that's already well known and is returning and is already well loved, and most of that viewing is within on the DVR. So from an advertising perspective, that allows then your ad sales to potentially look at, well, should we start doing a dynamic ad insertion on VOD services, versus DVR, because you might have the ability to monetize that in a different way for a returning series versus a new series. So really using that data to determine the programming and ad sales strategy in order to maximize the revenue potential.
So that's a relationship with advertising, but you'd also be able to, over time, look at changes in audience consumer patterns between different kinds of distribution.
Most certainly, and so, you know, now that, and it was mentioned earlier, that the broadcasters are very much more in a direct consumer model. We know a lot more about our actual end viewers than in the past, where our customers were really the cable services and we're more of a B2B service, and now we're becoming much more B2C. We know through metrics, through, you know, actual people visits to our websites, et cetera, and can start tailoring, you know, content and the advertising and start understanding more about that viewer from a direct consumer perspective.
We're going to come back to the B2C transformation, but first, Mark, I was really interested to find out how much CBC is really paying attention to these kinds of metrics. So, you know, within the public broadcast context, so I mean, some of that, you know, would be like your commercial competitors, I suppose, or colleagues looking for ad placement, but it also would give you great tools to understand Canadian audiences. So tell us a little bit what you're doing.
Well, CBC's always had a long history of investing and in research. We're actually proud members of Numeris. I got to reiterate what Neil said. We really we take for granted how excellent a measurement system we actually have in Canada with PPM. We really are positioned to take measurement to the next level. But more than just the technology is the company. It's a cooperative. It's not. We don't have two companies like they have in the States, like Nielsen and Rentrack, who, you know, are fighting over whose currency, you know, you're gonna buy and trade from. The industry has come together to actually produce the data that is trusted and transparent, and so we need to build on it. And so I would just add that our challenge in the digital agent following Felix is actually adding that return path data, adding that granularity. How do we get set-top box data? How do we get server data into the measurement system? And it's a real challenge, because we're all companies, and we have our own interests, and we tend to want to keep the data to ourselves, but, you know, we need to recognize that we will all be better off if we are all, you know, part of the measurement system and contributing, you know, return path data, set-top boxes, server data to improve, you know, the measurement system for the future.
So, can you talk about each of you a little bit about where social, you know, fits? I mean, when you started measurement, you know, this is a company that has a very long legacy, and there was no social data. So, in a world where there's both a product that obviously is being distributed, you can see what audiences are doing, but social has a phenomenal impact on, as we've heard, uptake, the quality of audience engagement. So where does social fit in this when you think about emerging the measurement system? Do you want to start out with that?
Sure, happy to start. So digital measurement is clearly a top priority. Numeris has just launched a new strategy that with a significant focus on digital measurement. When you look at digital measurement, just going off what Mark and Felix just described, let's put it in three categories. And you have to speak about the integration of data sets, so you can have a much greater understanding of your audiences, the purposes of your programming, and your commercialization. So you just simply want to understand your audiences better. So if you put them into three particular groups, the first one is online integration. That's a huge priority for Numeris. We're just kicking that off. We'll probably do that with a digital partner and to deal with the complexities associated with that, which is happening all around the world. That's a priority. Second priority is going to be set-top box and return path data that Mark just described. So we're happy to be working with the CRTC on we've been engaged, Numeris has been engaged to do a technical test just to see if it's technically feasible to integrate. We're doing it with 3 BDUs to see can it technically be done. And if it can be technically done, well, that report is going to be going back to the CRTC, and then from there the CRTC will decide if they want to proceed with a test hopefully in the Toronto market to see what its value is. So that's going to be forthcoming. We're very excited about that. Now the third one is integration of social, to your question. So Numeris looked at it. To my knowledge, I've only been there for a while, so they have looked at it in detail. The reality is that social, when Numeris is largely prioritizing its efforts based on the needs of the industry. That's what I get out of bed every day, is how do we improve the industry. When it comes to social, the various members in this industry have developed social tools to meet their particular businesses. They have social strategies that differ from each other because of their strengths, based on their asset mixes and the kind of audiences and loyalty they have. They then also have very specific means to measure that. And so they then have unique social strategies. They also have unique measurement of that. When Numeris looked at it, they say, okay, should we take that on and develop an industry solution which is a consistent, high standards, uniform solution for measuring social? The answer was no. It wasn't a high enough priority because it was so fragmented at that point in time, and therefore that's where we are right now. We are not pursuing an industry solution for social for those reasons. We're going to focus on online, and we're going to focus on return path data.
Okay, so Mark, maybe pick this up though, because what then do we do about social? How should people manage that those important sets of data in relationship to what Numeris will provide? You're actually speaking. You can speak as a broadcaster.
Yeah, sure. Well, social referrals are actually a quarter of all of our traffic on our website. So making all of your content socially shareable is a critical strategy for us. In terms of measurement, that's really Adobe Omniture and Comscore at this time, as Neil was saying. Numeris is not going to be measuring in that space, and I think that's the right decision.
But how then, so let's speak to the folks in the room. So how then should they think about their own strategies in terms of using social data in relationship to the kind of data that Numeris is providing?
That's a very hard question.
Because we're looking at trend analytics, and I think people are trying to understand, well, if you're a producer, are you dependent on the broadcaster or the distributor? There are tools that producers use to look at social and how their product is moving. So I think since we're trying to figure out strategy here a little bit for the next stage,
right.
It is a hard question.
Right. Well, Christopher Berry's from CBC's on a panel tomorrow. I mean, he's their digital optimization expert, so he'd actually be a good person to answer. But I think Felix, actually being in operations, would know a lot
We'll
about
toss the
football. So toss it over here.
To the extent that social can drive the parts of the business that can be monetized, that's what my clients are looking for, which is, how do we drive tune-in? How do we drive views on our website that are then monetized, via serving advertising to that audience? Having data, whether it's through, Twitter, Facebook, people think when a website offers you log into this website via your Facebook credentials, that's a convenience. You're actually handing over a whole bunch of data. And so that data, though, is useful because we have demographic data. We know if they're single or married. We know their geographic region. For cable companies, we know who their pay TV subscription is with, which is extremely important in order to help with saying, view this on Comcast or view this on Rogers or Telus or whatever. And so to the extent that social can drive, and we use that data to be able to say, we think that with the launch of this new show, or we think that if we do a catch-up marathon on this service for these viewers, we know that this satellite service is very popular amongst this type of audience. We know who that audience is based on their logins to our website, and we can really very much tailor tune-in and monetization based on that. So that's really where the currency of social really, hits the road, is in that regard.
No, that's very helpful. Just to share some of some high level just content about what you were learning about Canadian audiences and some of the ways that they're changing.
I think in my short time there, what I found interesting coming from a broadcaster perspective to a measurement company, that is information that's available daily that we should pay attention to. As a simple example is simply the changing demographics of this country. What in my early days, sitting back and part of what I did in the past is various deals and various content genres. You sit back and you make fundamental assumptions around audiences. What are the available audiences? And are you aware as to the changing makeup of those audiences by way of changes in demographics? How does the average Canadian, what is the profile of the average Canadian today? And I think that's really important as you continuously, especially since a discoverability summit, as you go and discover audiences and build a relationship with audiences. I mean, at this day and age, content is a very personalized experience with personalized devices. And so I would say, and this is what I've been promoting and having very healthy conversations with members, is let's really step back and look at the changing demographics and how does that influence your content decisions, and then ultimately how do you monetize it. But that relationship is very important. So that's what I would share with you.
Yeah, so one of the most interesting insights that we've identified now is that first off, premise, of course, as Neil was saying before, 90% of all TV viewing is still happening on a traditional service, so let's not get too ahead of ourselves. But we have actually identified in our research, we've segmented this group, which we actually call, we've coined the term TV My Way. It's almost 10% of the population. They're mostly young, they're super highly educated, and the key thing is they want to watch online. They watch virtually all of their television online. But most interestingly too, is they actually prefer to watch it on their laptops and phones. Like this is not like I don't have access to a television set. They actually want to watch on their laptops and they want to watch on their phones. Half of them don't even have a television set. So so that's one. The other two is just the reality today is that TV has become like a good book. TV's become like a good book. When a lot of these TV My Way viewers, when they think about watching television, they don't go like our parents do and turn on the television set and try and find a channel to watch something. They think, oh, well, I'm watching Breaking Bad, so I'm going to go to the next chapter in Breaking Bad, the next series. So for a lot of people, TV's just basically become like a good book.
Well, that's great news for content producers, isn't it?
I think it's excellent news for content producers. And I think as well too, I mean, what's happening too is that we have to think in terms of measure of time, because I mean, a show like Breaking Bad, people are still watching it. Better Call Saul, one of the best shows around now, had its final episode of the second season only got about 300,000 viewers, but it's a total hit because people watch it on their own pace. There's people who have PDR'd it and we're going to watch it in 2 months from now or something like that. So so it's we have to factor in the longevity of content has actually expanded as well.
Also very exciting, that whole notion of the long tail, which is from almost the previous century. We're actually now beginning to see that come to reality. So how do you then use data to look at those kinds of trends? I'm going to throw this to you, Blix, because something can not be popular and then trend and then go away and then come back again.
Sure. It goes back to data and looking at and so content owners, especially ones that have been in the business a long time, have a very deep reservoir of content that they own, that they've produced, that in some instances they haven't produced, which I can get back to, and being able to deeply understand their content and what it has and how it compares to content that's out there can really help for future monetization, right? So understanding your own product catalog and understanding kind of what that can offer you and being able to offer that on new platforms as these new platforms come about, and you have the ability to monetize something that potentially you couldn't. In the States we have shows like The Tonight Show, or a show that ran 50 years and is really consumed in 3 or 4 minute segments, or Saturday Night Live, which is a comedy sketch show, you can't monetize a single episode of that necessarily. That's 8 years old. But you can monetize the fact that Prince, performed on this episode in this year, and this episode in this year, and this episode in this year, and having that deep understanding from a metadata perspective of what is in your catalog can really lead to monetization as these platforms exist. And having that metadata available to you, ideally from the point of production, that can flow all the way through to the distribution side, is really the genesis of that.
Yeah, we had a bit of a chat when we were preparing for the panel. Whoops, we're all having a little ear challenge. About how to really understand how producers can take advantage of the big data era. So you're talking about that a little bit. Can you maybe drill down a little bit about what you mean by metadata? For the producers in the audience, what should they be tagging? What descriptions should they be using?
Yeah, so getting that too from the production side, there's usually a kind of a dividing line between production and distribution. And so you have a lot of technical tools that are available on the production side that people use, but much of that data does not actually flow through to the end. And I feel like that's a big gap, because that metadata can actually be used down the road for specifically the purposes I was talking about. That's a really good example of that. But understanding kind of at the segment level and really going down to the strata of what you understand about, down to the shop level, depending on what business you're in. If you're in news or sports, things like that, down to the shop level really matters. I had a project for a television company that specifically focuses on golf. And so we would focus on what hole, what golf course, was it a great shot, was it a hole-in-one, all those kinds of things. And so you literally had scene by scene, shot by shot, 9 levels of metadata, so that you could then, from an archive perspective, you want to pull up the greatest shots at Augusta golf course. You could then pull those segments up and obviously integrate it with your media asset management system so that you could quickly do that. And that was triggered from the untimely death of a golfer, and they wanted to get all the footage of that golfer that they had. So they had all the archive, and they had no way to pull all of that back without having 30 interns over a weekend have to look at all of this footage in order to do that.
Neil, do you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about how you mentioned earlier that you saw a bit of a big shift from the B2B to the B2C world. So what does that mean again for the different audience members here in the room? How should they be thinking about who they are in fact using data to speak to?
So I think there's a huge difference between what content producers and broadcasters need in terms of tagging their data, as Felix described, for their particular purposes of episodic review, flow, and cutting it up, distributing it differently to attract new audiences and have different kind of experiences. That definitely is a content producer or broadcaster set of criteria that they gotta feel comfortable that they can get the maximum value out of that. I think from an industry perspective, one of our top priorities is to deal with developing a hybrid measurement system that allows us to take traditional panel-based audiences with census-based audiences and actually be able to understand understand audiences holistically. So what do I mean by that? If you're sitting there, and fortunately Numeris, working with their members, most of the content is encoded, so we capture it. So that's the good news. So why would I be so focused on video and pushing an expansion of audience measurement in video when we have 90% or over 90%? I think that's going to change. It's changed in the last year. It's gone down a couple of points. So where does that take us? If it takes us from the position that we absolutely need to understand on every piece of content produced who the audiences are and how they're consuming it, that would be the goal. So to get there, we're going to have to find a hybrid system where we can actually walk between the two. How do you take impressions, or how do you take views, and how do you compare that to AMA? There's 40 billion something equal to 5 million AMAs. Like, what's good? What's success? What's resonating with the audiences in terms of comparing those audiences, and what's actually considered from a sales perspective a premium or a unique audience demographic to sell against. We don't have systems in this country that do that right now. And so that's what we're building, to have a better understanding of audiences holistically. So that's where we're going to focus. The production side and the respective tools within the content producers and broadcasters is something I strongly encourage them to spend time on, because I think that just informs their content decisions.
Right. I mean, I know in looking at what producers need and speaking with them in this shift, I mean, some of what they want to see are opportunities and barriers relating to a project's cast. For example, you know, how those performers trend and where they're situated, who they speak to in terms of Canadian international audiences, even a title, you know, which audiences, which market segments will it appeal to, refining genres, and actually identifying and finding audiences, you know, the kind of demographic segmentation that, and then the need to personalize within that context. So I think given that we're looking at discoverability not only in Canada but internationally, there is a need for tools for producers, you know, as well as the distribution side and the advertising side. Mark, any comments from you? I know you're also looking at what the next generation of tools need to be.
Well, I think it's interesting when talking about sort of producers and the kind of research that they need. I mean, I think there's a view now that we can use data to create the best show that everybody's going to want to watch, and I actually think that that's a bit of a false goal. I mean, I think great content is made by great minds, you know, great creative people. Where there's a lot of developments is actually in getting great content found. I mean, with all of with recommendations engines, with advertising targeting, you know, where the excitement is in the long tail is getting that show that you never even heard of, and getting it in front of you and realizing, oh my God, like, you know, this is fantastic. I'm going to binge two seasons in a weekend.
Yeah, that's great. So Felix, to you a little bit on the B2B transition.
Sure.
We're going to pick that up again and thinking about a little bit also from the producer's perspective, what they might need.
Yeah, so you know, I think having that direct connection with your actual audience is still something that, at least on the television side, is still fairly new from a historical perspective. You used to serve it out to a big audience, and you really didn't have a direct connection between a very specific viewer, and now we have that opportunity to have that direct connection. And that really starts from the very beginning. You know, the shows start developing a relationship with their audience at the point that they essentially announce their production. And so developing that relationship as you're actually creating the show, behind the scenes footage, you know, having your cast members interact with the audience via social media, all of those things are tools that you simply didn't have, you know, a generation ago with regards to the production. Basically, production was done in secret. You beamed it out and hopefully you got an audience, but now you can actually build that audience from the very beginning. And so by the time your show actually premieres, and even the idea of a premiere is being turned on its head, because we now have shows that pre-premiere that may air on an online platform before they air you know, on linear broadcast, that are now doing day-and-date international air. So you used to have where a show would air, you know, domestically in its home country first and then roll out onto the rest of the world. Now you have global premieres where everything's airing at the same time. And so the ability to form that relationship with the consumer from the very beginning is, you know, really key to building an audience and really driving, you know, that. And so that's just a tool we just didn't have previously.
Thank you. Mark, what do people need to do to effectively integrate this into workflow? I'm going to actually ask each of you this. You work at a major broadcaster. How is it changing the way that work happens?
Well, it's mind blowing the amount of data that you can collect. But And I mean, as Felix was saying, I mean, you have to do that in a very meticulous way. You have to understand how the data is going to be used. But again, I think the big point is that we can all, you know, be collecting our own internal server data. We can hopefully get it at the postal code level, so we can combine it with other data sets and learn, how to advertise to people who like yoga, or some very micro niche targets. But the key thing is that we also need to remember that we're an industry, and the best way for all of us to have a good view of the total consumer, the total audience at a granular level, is to have a trusted organization that we all work with and are providing data to as well.
Felix, workflow, how's it shifting, and what are some of the places where it's not working so well?
Sure. Well, I think part of it is you have to start at the very beginning, right? You can't do all this great number crunching and data analytics unless your operational workflows are settled at the beginning. So, starting with metadata and taxonomy. So you're starting to actually see, at least in the States, actual executive positions being created to talk about metadata and taxonomy. So I've actually seen recently, vice president of taxonomy, vice president of enterprise metadata. They're actually, in my last company, we created a director of metadata and taxonomy, because unless you have that structure from the very beginning, you're going to have lots of different silos of data and the unique content identifiers that you need in order to be able to get that data back and be able to tie it all together. Unless you have kind of a master data plan that can tie all those pieces of content together, you're going to end up spending a lot of time trying to reconcile all of that information, and you won't be able to do it in a timely way to be able to do anything actionable on it. So having your metadata, your taxonomies in place from the very beginning, and when you're designing your workflows for distribution, keeping all these things in mind, because what I've started to see is that as each new measurement type comes about, it might then mean you have a new workflow that you have to implement, a new watermark you have to put on, a new tag that you have to put on, which can then, as everybody's trying to make their workflows more efficient, actually reverse the trend, and now you have a separate version for linear, a separate version for on-demand, a separate version for TV everywhere, which is the exact opposite direction you want to go from an operational cost perspective. So really those are the two things in particular that I would recommend that folks focus on.
Thank you. Neil, is the technology reliable? Do we have any challenges as we're moving more and more to really looking to those data to help direct our decisions?
Well, Felix is bang on. You need to ensure that the data is clean so we can do something with it. And dealing with the complications, and it's not easy. It's everyone's dealing with the inconsistency, if you wish, and the operational challenges associated with that as we try to, as the industry finds new means to distribute content. So we got to get that right, and they're working hard on it. I'm fully confident that that'll solve itself. And then from there, we then need to enhance the system in this country, which is back to the total measurement audiences by way of the digital measurement system. And from there, with revised standards, we actually can understand across the various audience types, then allow the ad effectiveness tools to kick in and do what they need to do to inform those sort of commercial decisions. Allow, with the basis of understanding audiences on a holistic level, understand the producers to understand the trends and the interests and what fascinates audiences and what's intrigue audiences and what does nation sharing experiences look like. And so then they can effectively design content and do what this summer is about, is around audiences discovering new content. And I think if we don't have a stronger measurement system in this country to launch off those other particular value add, if you wish, in this industry, is going to be difficult to achieve.
So we do have some time left, and I'm sure that there's questions or comments, and I see a hand up here. Oh, microphone, sorry. And it would be great if you identified yourself too, if you don't mind.
My name is Natalie Klim, and I'm from MIT. I have a question regarding privacy. So with all this new data that you're talking about, what are some of the privacy issues? How does it fit into the larger discussion about privacy in general, not just in relation to media analytics, and how does that relate to policy?
Is that right?
Take that one.
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. So privacy, of course, is a significant concern in this country and across the world, no doubt about it. I think privacy will come up more in my recent experience in the context of return path data. And you look at, I was just reviewing various practices around the world to address that and respect privacy. I believe the CRPC are looking at in the working group. I can't comment on that. I'm not part of the working group. But I believe in that context I can see privacy. Outside of that, in terms of the standards and the worldly standards under which present day privacy is protected will continue. I truly believe if we're going to expand digital measurement in this country, it's going to be off the strengths of total audience measurement standards that currently exist, which fully respect privacy at a respondent level. So I'm not concerned about privacy in terms of going into the integration of data sets in the online, because we'll build it off the strengths that currently exist that respect privacy.
Do you want to take that?
That's a doozy. Look, it's the challenge. It is the challenge of the new research age, because I mean we want to have granular level data at the individual level so that you can actually better offer programs, better target advertising. But the challenge is people also want to it's respect their privacy. It's weird, we post all this stuff on all of our social networks, but we still want, we're surprised when people see it sometimes. But anyway, privacy is part and parcel of the new the new research age. We have to find a way to anonymize the data and respect people's privacy.
Well, I think that last point is really important, is how to look at anonymous data, so that one can look at demographics and trends without, and extract from that the actual individuals, and looking at those sorts of analytic systems. And that's part of why it's so great to have the long form census back. Thank you, because we now have detail on Canadian citizens and people who live in this country and their needs.
Yeah, I would add one more thing if I could, is that I think the key thing is actually if we can get the postal code level. If you can get to the postal code level, you don't realize how similar you are to your neighbors until you realize that we're going from an era where there's large panels and we have demographics, but then when big third-party data sets gets combined at the postal code level, and it's at the assumption that you are similar to your neighbor. And so from an operational perspective, when you get the postal code, you have a lot of information about somebody.
Felix, privacy in the U.S. context?
Well, much of the data that we're gathering that I was referring to is it's essentially voluntarily given, or you sign up for a contest, or you sign up for to be notified about certain things, and so people are actually entering this data in, or agreeing to provide that data via authentication via Facebook and things along those lines. And so to the extent that that data is being collected, it's being done voluntarily. No different than when I install an app on my phone, and it says, well, when you install this app, you're going to volunteer where you are, and all. It's like, okay, well, I want it, so I'm going to hit OK. So to that extent, and how the data is used, obviously it's used, from an aggregation perspective, anonymously. But I can't speak specifically to the regulatory aspects of it, but I know certainly that those are the kinds of things that they're looking to maintain best practices on, is making sure that they're not utilizing that information in a way that will be offensive to the end user.
Thank you. It's a little bit hard to see. Oh, is the question over here? He's coming to you with a mic. Just taking a second. We have a lead up to your question.
This better be a good question then. My name is Kyle Mack, and my question is, what security measures are in place to protect the data that has been mined?
Maris, do you want to start with that?
So So you have to elaborate on your question when you say the data that is mined. What do you mean by that?
So the collected data that has been observed through organizations, or for example, the signaling demonstrated by people entering contests, as you said, but what measures are put in place to protect the data, and how long necessarily will it be kept? So is there anything in place, some regulatory body, what keeps the data given to solely the company and not given to anyone else?
Well, I can speak on from the Numeris perspective, which is an industry solution as opposed to a individual member situation, because everyone collects data. Everybody collects data. So because we adhere to strict methodologies and very strict audit concerns, all of that is protected at the respondent level. And everything we do in terms of integration of data sets, or ensuring that things are summarized at a level that respects privacy and respects the terms and conditions under which is acceptable in terms of retention of data and the privacy of data. From an industry perspective, that's never been a concern as far as I know. But I can only speak at the industry level. I can't speak at the member level.
Our lab actually works with a number of really significant data sets. One, frankly, from InLogic, who does some of the computational work behind Numeris, and the other from a major media outlet. All of that data is stripped of any identifications and is actually kept on completely secure servers. Some of the work that we do only happens within the actual physical space of those entities, because people are so incredibly protective of that data. We treat it as though it's data from medical records. So there's a lot of security surrounding that, and a lot of respect for university researchers. Now this would be true for your Carleton life. We're all subject to Tri-Council regulation in Canada, which means that there's a tremendous respect for privacy, securing data, destroying data once it's been analyzed, and I think it's really important that industry, frankly, follow that kind of strict guidelines as well, and how it manages personal data. So, and that in part, reflects on your question. Any other questions? It's hard to see people up there. Oh, good. There's somebody here with her hand up. And if I don't see you, just jump up and down, and he'll arrive with a microphone.
Hi, I'm Kate Hanley from Digital Theory Media Consulting. And I'm just wondering from any of you, including Sarah, where we are with data for content creators, if we were to apply a lean startup methodology to content creation, where we're failing early, we're failing fast, we're making changes to our content as the data comes in and to our approach. What tools do we have available? And I'm wondering if Sarah and your lab, if you're working with this at all.
That's such an interesting point. There's actually a couple of content-focused companies in Canada right now that are looking at the kind of factors that I was talking about. So really understanding at a granular level the nature of audiences, casting, the relationship of their content and advertising, not only understanding that in the Canadian but the international context. And what they're doing is looking at aggregating different kinds of analytics tools, from Google Analytics to some of the more advertiser-focused tool sets to develop a new technology that would be specifically focused at the producer community and would provide those analytics both for larger companies who operate in the international Canadian market and for what is described sadly as the squishy middle, those producers who do have relied on subsidy and aren't just producing YouTube content is great, but they're not only producing for the YouTube environment, but to try and really give people those tools. So stay tuned, because we're in the process of actually looking at some research funding to try and build that environment and push it forward. I feel that producers should not only rely, we had a bit of a debate about this, but should not just rely on broadcasters and their distributors to help them navigate this incredibly complex environment. I think that there's a need for sophisticated analytic tools that will help producers. I'm very anxious about what's going to happen to the amazing quality Canadian content that has happened. I think the public broadcaster, and I think we'll hear from other people over the next day and a half, has a phenomenal role in maintaining public space and a mandate for quality Canadian content of all kinds. And the Film Board does as well, that they didn't receive double their funding in the last round of.
We're getting
but-
double?
No, but I mean, they didn't receive a significant
Yes.
infusion of dollars. So stay tuned. I think there's a lot of work ahead in this space. Thank you for your question. I don't know if others want to pick that up. No?
That's a good answer.
Okay. I actually, okay, good. And then I have a question, and then we're almost done. Oh, okay. This one, and then that one. Thanks.
Hi, Megan Bingley. I just have a quick question about measuring audiences, obviously. The bane of any researcher is always, it comes down to sampling. So we've talked a lot about the Canadian system, the technology, is it reliable, some of the upgrades that are being made, and how we have a world-class system measuring all the way down to AMA, and in fact measuring audiences as young as 2 years old, their listening and viewing habits. I know that Nielsen increased their sample size in the US a couple of years ago quite significantly, up to 30 or 40% in some of their markets. But we didn't do the same here in Canada. So I was just wondering if you wanted to comment a little bit about sampling and how important that is for us here in Canada, particularly since we are trying to really lead in being able to measure niche audiences and smaller groups and audiences.
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that. So there's, as I mentioned earlier, the only similarity between the two territories is the hardware, and that's because Nielsen has the IP for the portable people meter. So when you talk about panels, let's just go through some of the numbers. So Nielsen just went from a 20,000 to a 40,000 household panel. We're currently sitting at 4,528. On a per capita basis, Canada has a greater representation of panels than anyone. The UK has a 5,100 member panel, but considering their population, so on a per capita basis, I think the panels of Numeris is world class. If you look at the Netherlands, I think it's about 1,258. So from a panel representation, we're on great ground. A huge difference, though, in terms of how the technology is used. Nielsen continues, and they're changing this on the local level. Recent announcements, but they've been largely the meters connected to the set. So it's basically you're only measuring what's happening with that set at that point in time. Versus with portable people meter, we're actually measuring content that's being consumed anywhere they are. People will wear these meters roughly 14 hours a day, so we are picking up a great deal of their exposure to content. So I think from a panel representation, we're on great footing, and representing and accurately reflecting the audiences of this country and the consumption of content. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I'll just add to that if we're comfortable with the size of the panel, I think we need to recognize how difficult it actually is to the cost and the cost and the difficulty in sort of recruiting and keeping panelists. If we want to add more granularity to the system, we need to have return path data. So we're going to have to maintain a high quality large panel for the foreseeable future. But to measure the total audience, but if we want to get that granularity, it's not necessarily by increasing the panel. That can help if the industry can find the money to do it. But I think it's actually in integrating return path data. That's where you're going to get your granularity.
Thanks. Kate, I wanted to mention a company. They're interesting. They're in the West Coast. They're called Alert TV, and they're actually building a predictive analytics system focused on the needs of producers. So predictive analytics is where you can look at trend analysis over time and start to say, we think that these kinds of audiences would be interested in this kind of content. So I know we have a question over here. Your head your hand up. You need your mic, the mic. And this will be our last question, and then we'll have a little wrap.
Hi, my name is Gretchen, and I work in the community media sector, which is largely not served by the kind of data that we're focused on. So I'd like to just, as we're concluding, shift the conversation briefly to qualitative data and what that can bring us in terms of a vision for new methodologies in 2016, specifically when we want to think about the evaluation of existing regulatory policies like the diversity of voices policy, or to even think about impact or the going to the post-code level of analysis. So what kind of methods can we be inspired by when it comes to more qualitative or even audience research that doesn't serve a commercial purpose, which is my research interest?
Well, thanks for asking that question. One of the things that I wanted to end with actually was to talk about the importance of thick data in ethnography and other kinds of tools that we can use to, reflect on basically, quantitative data. And I think colleagues also mentioned that there's still an incredibly important role for creative producers and discretionary decisions around what's actually produced. Plus, on the regulatory level, part of why I'm so interested in working with the producer community is to understand the long tail, other kinds of markets, niche market capacity, and other forms of distribution, which have been a strength in Canada in a less subsidized world. But we absolutely need to have the cultural studies and ethnographic work that happens alongside to the more sort of quantitative pieces. And you need those skill sets to look at the quantitative data and help us understand how to apply them. So it's actually a great question to end on. Mark, do you want to comment?
I'll just say, if you're talking about communities, you're also talking about a sort of micro geographic area, and like with companies like Environics, they have a fantastic product called Prism that lets you really just target in on very specific postal codes and get all kinds of data about who the people in those areas are and what they do and how they get to work and what they watch and what they listen to and whatnot. So in terms of community research, I mean, there's all kinds of new methodologies like that open up new opportunities for insights.
Thank you.
Sure. Non-commercial is not a word that I use very much in my practice. But all kidding aside, my wife runs a nonprofit that actually produces content for the theater community. It's the American Theater Wing, which produces the Tony Awards, which is a commercial venture. But then, as the nonprofit, her charge for the American Theater Wing is to expand audiences, expand people who go to see the theater, and expand the cultural aspect of theater going. And so they utilize a lot of data that's created by state arts agencies, city cultural affairs groups, and also studies that are done, through trade associations associated with the theater, in order to, then produce, and her team actually produces premium content served free of charge to the theater community, specifically based on these types of things. So making sure that underserved audiences are, presented with content that's specific to them, utilizing these data sources that are available to tailor that content for them.
Thank you. And any final comment?
Sure. Just I think I love the role of data and the kind of intelligence and awareness that we get in terms of understanding these audiences, and to the extent from a non-commercial perspective that we can leverage the audience data that we have available and tailor it and allow it to be the starting point for a greater conversation around how to reach those audiences, wherever community or local or regional or national interest that you may have. So, access to numerous data, producers can have access to numerous data and use it in the way that suits their needs. So I think more access to data, more granular data that Mark referred to earlier, and our collective efforts to get there is the way to go.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, each of you, for participation on the panel. Thank you very much to the audience for being so engaged and asking great questions, and have a great rest of discoverability.